Alright, time for another DraftScience video presentation. I hate to say it, but more of the same. But that's what it takes, frankly. You have to argue things to death, and people they can't let go of some old perception, unless you really, really have to do twice as much work. You have to do twice as much proof and twice as much everything to change anything. But the scientific types should always know that any doubt needs to be resolved. That you have to check everything. You have to be really careful. Careful is a really important thing if you're a scientist. And clearly, Dr. Don Lincoln isn't any of those things. He's not a good scientist. He's not a good human being. He's not any of this. Because frankly, I just made a critique of his video. He presented a video arguing that this is good science. I'm giving you an understanding of why quantum mechanics exists in the first place and all of that stuff. And it's all on this two-slit experiment. And he just did a video that was basically just a bunch of biblical reading. It wasn't in any way connected to actual reality. He didn't show the single slit experiment in any kind of reasonable, fair way. And he certainly didn't show the double slit experiment in the sense he totally ignored the fact that there's two patterns. And they both have to be explained. And you can only do that with four sources. And lots of things happen as a consequence of paying attention to the actual reality rather than the storytelling. And then he called me names. Okay, and that's all he did. He didn't respond to anything stated. So maybe I'll just post the points as a response, and that we have it written down. The 6 little things to know. Okay, that kind of say there's just no choice here anymore. You have to argue within that box. Those are the facts, the underlying facts, and your theory has to explain those facts. All right. So that's sort of where we are. So anything that would improve those facts, okay, that's sort of what I was soliciting in the video I made, is if you disagree, let's hear why you disagree, because they seem pretty solid as facts. But anyway, yes, but anyway, that's not what happens in reality. There's no concession to the facts. There's no point in talking about it because people just keep ignoring it for decades because they just don't care. Again, people have written about how there's just no good reason to believe in kinetic energy, and no one's paid any attention because they really don't care that there's no evidence. They just don't care, and that's not scientific. But it is human. Humans do suck. I mean, that's one of the theories you get out of this theory. As you do these different theories and you figure out different facts, they all start pointing to other things. And one of the biggest facts I've learned in this 10-year process is that human beings really do suck. I mean, I had some holdout, just as in the past, I did think that you could always fix the political system because the judiciary would have integrity and would always eventually fix it. But it doesn't have any, judges are the worst kind of lying sacks of shit you could find on earth, really. I mean, they're just despicable lying sacks of shit, hypocrite bullshitters, just political operatives. They don't have any principles. And the same is true of the scientists. They've all lost all principles. They're all just being popular and stylish. And they're not doing anything that has any integrity at all. It's all just mush and babble. Trite religious crap, poetically stated. They put their little robes on and their silly hats and their little $10,000 slippers and then tell you a fucking bedtime story. I mean, it's ridiculous what it has become. Well, anyway, so he says, so I asked, do you think your father would be proud of the fact that you didn't answer my questions? You didn't respond by showing me to be stupid or ignorant or ill-informed. You just called me names. And that's what you left it at. Because, you don't have a counter-argument. All right. I mean, the points were clear in the video. Clearly, he watched the video and he just didn't care. Okay, that it's true that show the single slit pattern correctly. He didn't explain the double slit pattern correctly. Fundamental to the description of the video. His video is supposed to be a description of it, and he didn't describe either one of those patterns correctly. I mean, it's a fundamental error. It's a catastrophic error. Anyway, you, on the other hand, he realized was very sketchy. So he's using the word sketchy again. So he used that in his video, talking about the belief, the theory, that our minds control what happens to electrons. He thinks that theory is sketchy. It's not ridiculous. No, it's just sketchy. What does he think sketchy means? Sketchy means, the lines aren't perfect, but it's basically a sketch. It's close, but not really that well done. I mean, sketchy doesn't mean ridiculous. But anyway, you just add a zero. So now he thinks he's worth $2 million. You should have to pay $2 million to challenge a physicist. I'm sure he thinks all of his colleagues are worth $2 million too. It should cost $2 million to get their attention and say, you want to answer some questions, butthole? It's just pathetic. And understand, this has nothing to do with politeness and all that horse shit, because I have been very polite in offering $2,000, and I've gotten nothing. It doesn't happen because they don't want to be on trial. They don't want to have the trial. They don't want their physics to be tried. Just like that woman who does the I'm anti, whatever she's anti. I mean, she's for all of the woo in physics, but she pretends to be anti some of it somehow. But anyway, she runs some site where you pay $50 and you can talk to a physicist, but they won't let you record it. Yeah. I mean, what a pile of crap. Yeah, because they don't want to be accountable for the bullshit they say. All right. So, I mean, this person thinks it's okay to use my father's name, blah, 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 this and that. So I should find out what his father's name is and I should use it. It's fair game. I mean, it's public information. I'm sure I can find it. And I should use it in the comment section. No, I don't think so. But whatever. Go ahead. I mean, I don't know who that impresses. It doesn't impress me very much as a counter argument. But anyway, so then Stephen Bro goes on and on and on. Look at all of this to say he doesn't think, I don't agree with number 2 and 6. So he doesn't think the string thing is a good way of illustrating how the pattern is created. And I think it is. I mean, I don't have any reason to think it doesn't work. And Stephen types all this shit, and he doesn't provide any reasoning for why I should believe the nodes aren't the same size, and it wouldn't come out that way, and all of that stuff. So there's no reasoning. There's just this endless tripey bullshit. This endless stream of nonsensical, crappy, stupid insults that have no, that don't get to any point at all. He just keeps saying it emphatically. He knows it. He knows it. He knows it. Well, why do you know it? And he doesn't explain any of that. So, I mean, there's not much to say. So this guy says, I hadn't heard of this string experiment. Yeah, well, it seems pretty simple, but yeah, I hadn't heard of it either. Okay, and it's not until you think about the curved screen, again, that you can possibly even imagine it. Because it doesn't work if you try to do it on a flat screen, because you have to make the string longer and longer and longer. That's the whole point. I mean, yeah. So there you go. Look, all of this crap he's written. And there's absolutely no reasoning provided. Okay, just none. All right, so I said to Don Lincoln, the question wasn't was, okay? I didn't ask whether his father was, amazingly proud of him. I was asking him to think, would your father be proud of what you just did? Which is, you just called me stupid, idiotic names, pretended I'm not intelligent, pretended I'm not just asking reasonable questions about obvious things that I see as flaws in your presentation of the facts, and you ran away and decided just to insult me instead. and do nothing else. You did absolutely nothing else. So let's just understand, he provided no counter argument whatsoever. He just provided insults. All right, the idea is to use your imagination. Unfortunately, modern scientists don't have any rational imagination. And I think it's true. I mean, every model they run in their head, somehow gremlins get into it. And ponder the question, would he say you did a good job of answering my critique? So, you know, I made a critique of your video, pointing out what I think are obvious flaws, and flaws that shouldn't exist anyway. They're 60-year-old flaws. They were wrong 60 years ago when Feynman said them. They weren't true then. They've never been true. The Young analysis of the double slit does not produce anything like a reasonable answer. Okay, it can't explain the two patterns. I mean, these are obvious and systemic, okay, misimpressions you keep selling, okay, to an ignorant audience. And you should be outed, and you should account for it. Why do you keep saying things that aren't true? Why do you keep saying that Young nailed it when Young didn't nail it? He missed it entirely. Young didn't analyze the real double slit experiment. Or did you just hurl cheap insults? Okay. Yes, obviously that's what he did, and my father would be embarrassed if that's what I did. I'm just saying, okay? That would have embarrassed my father if I ran away from a challenge like that. And just decided I'll insult him rather than explain why he's wrong. All right, sketchy isn't a very descriptive statement. Okay, I think you should think the theory that our minds are controlling the path of electrons is worse than sketchy. So, you know, just pointing out that that's another error in your video, frankly, that you couldn't say anything more than sketchy regarding the idiotic theory that our eyeball, the photons we see, that is, the ones reflected off objects, somehow, okay, are controlling the path of things when we didn't control the source of the light in the first place. We don't see things because our eyeballs shoot out stuff and then get the reflection back. So obviously it's the universe controlling the electrons, and we're just bystanders. We're collecting information that would have gone where our eyeball. If our eyeballs aren't here, the light's still going to this location, right? So if I move my head over here, this location is still getting all of those photons. Isn't that amazing? Doesn't have a damn thing to do with me. I mean, really, it is ridiculous to believe that it works some other way. We collect information, okay, but we can collect it from any location because there's photons going over here, and there's photons going over here, and there's photons going over here. We don't do the experiment. The universe does the experiment. So you think you're the $2 million man. Just another theory from a scientist. Yeah, so silly theory. So that's where we left off. You know, but like I said, I will post the simple itemized list of the truth to him personally, in case he hasn't been paying any attention. So then I said to Stephen Bro, okay, so he says, I don't agree with number 2. Okay, and so I quoted number 2, which states, the math predicts models a result on a curved surface of radius L, the target distance. So he's disagreeing that when you do the math, okay, the math is really predicting, okay, a location in space. And that location has to be, I mean, it doesn't really have a choice. There's a distance from the target, you know, from the origin to the target, from the source to the target. And it's identified as L. And this distance is identified as, let's say, D. These distances can't change. They have to stay the same, or the math would be irrational. So these are distances that are established before if I'm doing this location, I use the same distance, I use the same L. If I'm doing this location, same distance, same L. So this L line is defining a point in space. It's not defining a point on a flat screen. It's defining a point on a radius. I've already explained this. This is a radius. Okay, it always has to be the same distance. If you change the distance, you change L, you're changing the entire equation. It's a different equation then. You can't change the distance, L, and use the math, because it's going to give you a different answer. And it's just, see, I mean, do you really have to explain to somebody that if I stretch something over, this flat screen is essentially an infinite plane, okay? It's infinite. Okay, you can't figure that out. And then obviously the stuff that's, if I was to put pieces of dust, in the way of a light source, that this piece of dust would end up being gigantic compared to this piece of dust, because this distance is going to be insanely large. And as it's traveling, the whole time it's traveling, it's a expanding arc. So if I have the L distance, here's the amount of the arc at L. If I allow the distance to extend 500 miles, right, to this flat plane that goes forever and ever, then obviously this distance is going to be gigantic, and so the node is going to appear huge. When it was the same size as all these other nodes. I mean, each one was the same size, okay? But the projection is going to be gigantic. And obviously, because it is an infinite plane at these very tiny angles, 0.000 or 10 to the minus 32 angle, at those very small angles, it's going to be, the last node is going to be insanely large. I mean, it's going to be insanely large. It's going to be infinitely large. But there's no argument here. You can't argue it. You're saying that the L does change in the math. Well, I'm saying it obviously doesn't. And until you provide some kind of evidence of somebody ever doing the equation where the L distance changes, it goes from, it doubles and triples and quadruples. Well, unless you show me some evidence that it does that, the statement has to stand as being correct. It's clear that the mathematics predicts these locations. It does not predict these locations. And these locations will clearly be a very different size, dimensionally, because they've expanded a whole bunch more. They've traveled more distance, spreading in both directions. They've gotten much bigger. So how could the math predict a much bigger when the math thought L was here? How could it predict this here when the L is here? It's going to predict this width. This width it predicts, not this width. And so I think I shouldn't even have to do this, right? I mean, he shouldn't, it's just stupid that he sits there and says this stuff just to be whatever, anti-me. This is just part of his nonsense. But to be so arrogant about it, just obnoxious. Okay, so I say, what possible grounds can you disagree? Clearly, the different nodes being predicted have to be the same L distance. No part of the math allows L to change. You are being ridiculous. Okay. As for the string thing, okay, my memory of the spirograph is that it creates a reliable symmetry. I also reason that the same amount of string has to roll over the pointer as you travel the circumference. If you have some evidence indicating otherwise, why don't you just provide it? Why do you have to always play silly games? Okay, so in all of these stupid, moronic comments he posted here, he's saying he wants to challenge me to shave my head if it turns out I'm wrong. All of this absolute, like he's 12 frickin' years old. He doesn't take any of this science seriously. It just all doesn't mean anything to him. This is all just for him to play this stupid game where he gets to just write all of these lies over and over and over again. I mean, it's just so fucking moronic. Well, anyway. But this is what you have to deal with in life, is these idiots. So let's see if there's a thread of truth somewhere in this horse shit. Okay? Now, one of the ironies is that Stephen Bro accused me of like stealing this idea of the string from some mechanism he saw back in the 50s or 60s. You know, where you could buy a kit or something, some educational kit. So I've already mentioned that in a video, so this isn't some new point being raised. And now it's ironic that he says it doesn't work. I mean, but this is not the first time he's done that kind of crap. Alright, so the argument is, now this is really a simple experiment, I should just do it. But I want to understand why he's arguing this, because none of my intuition says what he's saying could be true. I mean, absolutely none of it. It just doesn't seem rational. So as I pointed out, like spiral graphs always made very even, you know, patterns. And there wasn't any indication that what he's saying is true. Alright, so the simple argument is you have these 2 point sources, and you tie a string to the 2 point sources, and you'll have a loop in the string, you know, and you have a little tiny pointer in there, a little wheel, okay, that the spring, a little pulley. And the spring, you know, the string can roll on the little pulley. And what we're established is that the math is really predicting the pattern on this arc. Now the trick is that the center, okay, for this point source is going to be a straight line here, and the center for this point source is a straight line here. So there's really 2 arcs, okay, but they're only a millimeter apart, so it doesn't matter too much. But technically, this L is a little different than this one and this one, okay, from the center. But that's not the issue that we're discussing now. So what he says is that if I put the wavelength notches that are here, and I put them on the string, okay, and let's say I start, you know, just for fun, okay, let's start in the center, where the false node is, okay, where this is only happening in 1 millimeter. So there's 2 kinds. Somebody else says this in a comment, like they're telling me something I don't. No, somebody says it to Dr. Lincoln about the internal diffraction, and it's just kind of funny that you know, they don't even realize how deceptive it really is in terms of understanding that there's, you know, the diffraction where both objects are pointing in the same direction. All of that, all of those focuses are within 1 millimeter. You know, they're not spreading, they're not getting bigger, they're getting smaller. You know, they're getting tinier locations that all the light has to hit. So, you know, it's like Professor Lincoln brought up the Arzar spot or whatever the hell it was. That's exactly the point. The reason why there's a little, like say if you put a disc in front of a light, there's a little white spot, a little bright spot right in the dead center. And it's because there really is a fringe pattern that's going inside. Okay, the light's being diffracted in, and there is a fringe pattern, and the center of that fringe pattern, you can see that, right, where you can't see the rest of the fringes because there aren't enough photons. You can see that one because, frankly, all of the photons have to hit 1, 0. The zero, you know, the 0 of the very center of the target. All of the arrows have to hit that one spot, and that's why you see that one little tiny spot. Is because all of the light, the other fringes are spreading their light on an entire surface out here, where the one in the middle, all of the light is going into this one little tiny spot. So obviously this light, you might not see it because it's spread. Just like this, the pattern, when you project the pattern on a not curved surface, you're denying yourself some visibility, because the more you enlarge the pattern, the less likely you'll see the photons, because so few are hitting the same pieces of surface. So you're getting less visibility because the photons are spread over a larger area, so it's getting less and less and less bright. And so if you want to see the most photons, you try to do the experiment as close as you can to the source, but then the experiment gets very tiny, and that's the problem. But anyway, all right, so The argument is that you're going to travel this arc, and you're going to put these notches equal distant. Okay, so if there's 10 notches, you have, whatever, 5 on each side. And then you're going to start rolling on this arc. And my intuition is, as you're rolling, you can never change how much string is rolling over the pulley. I mean, it has to roll at exactly the same rate. So the notches would have to be like, it lines up with a center notch right there. And then it would have to be the same amount of distance each time going from center notch to center notch, because the same amount of string has to roll over. I mean, one string's getting longer, one string's getting shorter. So again, that makes mathematical sense if you're going to do a side angle side kind of thing to decide the, the relevant spacing. One side's getting bigger, the other side's getting smaller by exactly the same amount. When you square those, obviously you would end up with the same answer every time. The length of the string never changes. So how could it possibly make uneven notches? So that's my intuition. Again, I don't have any proof of it. It's just logically makes sense to me that as I'm rolling the wheel on this path, the same amount of string has to move. Whatever I lose here, I gain here, or vice versa. Obviously, I'll be losing it here, and it'll be gaining over here. And it will roll over the pulley at exactly the same rate. The notches would have to be the same distance apart. So I don't see anything wrong with that theory. Now, he wrote all of this crap, and he presented nothing to indicate what his theory is. So is he arguing that the nodes are much bigger over here, and then they get smaller and smaller and smaller or something? What's his theory? Because I don't understand it. I don't have reason to understand it. I never saw anyone, when even projecting it on a flat screen, I never saw anyone actually argue that the nodes get bigger and bigger and bigger. I never heard that argument. So I don't even know what this is about. I mean, I can't make any sense of it at all. And he's so emphatic that that it's right. He's so sure that this is what happens. I don't know why it would happen. So anyway, that's where we are as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I keep saying it. Go ahead, Steve. So you spent all of this rhetoric. Maybe I'll read his reply to the other guy who said he never heard of the experiment. I mean, I'm not going to read all this crap. So, it's just such a horrible waste of time. They're just horrible. Anyway. Gary, I'm waiting. It's only a piece of string with notches, you say. So what's the holdup? The holdup is I like to understand why something happens. Doing experiments isn't nearly as interesting as understanding why the result of the experiment would be a certain way. So frankly, even though this is a really simple experiment, I want to understand why it would happen before I see it happen. But regardless, it doesn't really matter. That's me. I'm saying to you, what's your holdup? If you know the truth is something else, why don't you just show it? I mean, if the truth is this is how it works, then show me it working that way. Because I don't see any reason why it should work that way. All right. You have been doing this test for a year. I don't even know what that means, as you imply it by endless confident repetition. This isn't even part of the theory. Let's understand, this is just a gimmick for being able to visualize it. It wouldn't matter whether this is true or not. It doesn't change anything, because we're really saying there's 4 sources and this is what they produce as nodes. I'm just saying I don't have any reason to think that this weirdness happens, that nodes get bigger or any of that crap happens. I don't have any reason to believe that's part of something I have to account for. I don't see any evidence for why I have to account for something that I don't see any evidence that it exists as the thing to account for. I don't see anyone theorizing regarding those changes. They theorize that the pattern goes into infinitely, and they don't even account for the fact that there's a finite number of nodes that are possible. The wavelength notches mean there's only a certain number of locations where you could possibly have constructive interference. That's one of the statements in the list. You should have disagreed with that one if you don't think that one's true. There's only a certain number of notches that equals the number of wavelengths. The number of wavelengths of the distance tells you exactly how many nodes are possible. There will be the same number of pairs of on and off as there are number of wavelength differences. Why didn't you disagree to that? Anyway, so this guy said, I hadn't heard of this string experiment, so he goes on and on. Well, anyway, so I'll read some of this one. But it's just so fucking stupid. So I said to stupid bro, all right, I read this already, right? Yeah, you're ridiculous, blah, 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 blah. So now he answers twice. Okay, so it's on a curved surface thing I forgot to respond to. Well, the problem with the curved surface is that it is an attempt to solve a problem that does not exist anyhow. It's not about solving a problem. It's about accurately identifying how the pattern is being created and where it's being created. Those are fundamentally important things. So he doesn't think it matters. He doesn't think it matters whether you think the pattern happens here or the pattern happens here. He doesn't think those things matter. And I would argue, well, of course they matter. Of course it's important to get it accurate and right. You have to know what the math is predicting. And so he actually thinks that when the pattern is here, let's say this is the actual, place. Okay, let me put a real node there, not this bullshit node. Okay, so this would be the center of the bright spot right here, at that location. He thinks that when you project that on a screen, that is, you're going to see it on a flat screen. So you mathematically have predicted this, but you're going to view it on a flat screen. He thinks that this will stay the same size, that somehow this node will go on this screen projection over here and it'll be exactly the same size as this. This is a defined size that the mathematics is telling you it'll be 2.5 centimeters. Alright, so the math is telling you that's the side of the whole node. Like every 2.5 centimeters is changed. So one node, the dark node is 2.5 centimeters. The light node is 2.5 centimeters. Now, realistically, when you view it, the light node is always going to look a little bigger than the dark node. But the idea would be this would be destructive, this would be constructive. And the constructive always bleeds into the destructive. That's just the way it works. Because the slits can never be perfect. You're talking about nanometers, 500 nanometer light. Well, the slits could actually have irregularities in them that are 20 or 40 nanometers, which means that this center is going to bounce around a lot. There's going to be legitimate photons that think they're going to the center and they're here, but they're really not the center. Okay, anyway. So his argument is that I'll be able to view this 2.5 centimeters by projecting it on a flat screen where it's now going to be 5 centimeters. So my math predicts it's 2.5 centimeters. I'm going to be viewing it where it's going to look like it's 5 centimeters. He doesn't understand how that's exactly what's going to happen. I'm not going to get right answers. Now the trick is that this arc, realistically, we're talking about the L distance being something like 5 meters, maybe even 10 meters. So this arc is huge, and we're only viewing a little tiny portion of the pattern. We're viewing this much of this whole arc. So obviously this can look pretty flat. Okay, so I just drew a line that, I could draw the circle, and you could say, well, that's, it's almost a straight line. So that it's going to be a tiny bit of difference in the beginning. But obviously at this point, right, if I was to simulate 89 degrees, it would make a huge difference. Because at 89 degrees on the arc, it's 2.5 centimeters. At 89 degrees on a flat screen, it's, 568 feet or something. It's huge. So again, I'm pretty confident in this statement, okay? So he can say whatever he wants to say. He can say all this crap. But to me, it's just crap, because there's nothing wrong with this logic, frankly. I don't see how he could possibly defend what he's arguing. First, that this isn't the location the math is predicting. Of course, this is the location, because the L number has to be a radius. And that this isn't going to be anywhere near the same as that over there. Now, in this short distance, right here in the middle, yes, there's very little difference between the size of this one and the size of this one. Very little difference. But the bigger the angle, the bigger the difference. And the differences get insane all the way to infinity over here. All right. I mean, this is a lot of minutia, a lot of detail that I don't think is necessary. If he had some evidence, he should just present the fucking evidence. But instead he just argues and argues and argues from I believe. And when I stuck my own finger in my eye, my brain said, I'm right. I don't know. I mean, there's, he's implying he did the experiment. Well, what were your results? What did you get? He can't show any of it. All right, on a curved surface thing, I forgot to, okay, the problem is the curved surface is that an attempt to solve the problem which does not exist anyhow. So clearly the problem exists if you wish to simulate the actual possible pattern. Now, whether or not light ever goes, okay, obviously at 0 degrees, at 90 degrees, 0 degree change in the two lines being right on top of each other. It seems very unlikely that the photons could actually go 90 degrees. So it doesn't seem very probable. And the point is also that maybe they never even go 89 degrees. Maybe they never even go to 85 degrees. Maybe they never get deflected that much. Okay, it never even happens. And that's why we only see pattern here. But clearly the theory extends to all these locations. And clearly Feynman's theory would extend to all these locations. So for you and many worlds and all the other ones that say all locations are open for the photon. So, I mean, all of them are talking about all these locations being in play. So, clearly very important if you were to simulate. If you were to make a simulator to accurately describe the pattern beyond our ability to see it, beyond there being enough photons for us to see the pattern, but we know it's still there, clearly you're going to get very different answers. All right. The problem supposedly is that projecting onto a flat surface distorts, stretches out the pattern, and the more it spreads out, the wider the angle. And how does that? How does anything dispute that? They make TVs now that are curved. The big screen TVs. They make them curved to prevent distortion. Anyway. The curved surface supposedly corrects this, permitting... It doesn't correct anything. The curved surface is accurate. That's the whole point. It should always have been understood that you're predicting. The math is predicting on a curved surface. L, the distance, is not one distance. It is a radius. Clearly a radius. That's the point that you're missing. I didn't point this curve thing out because it fixes something that was broken. I pointed it out because it's the fucking truth, you idiot. It's what the math is actually predicting. Oh, Jesus Christ. I mean, this is so fucking idiotic to have to go through all this crap. I mean, these people are so stupid. All right. The curved surface supposedly corrects this, permitting more of the pattern to be visible. Well, it does that also. I mean, obviously at the higher angles, you're spreading the light, to the flat surface, which means as you make the nodes artificially big, you're also making them artificially dim, because now you won't be able to see them well because there's so few photons spread over such a large distance. You can't see things that don't get hit with enough photons for you to be able to receive it, to see it. Snag is it doesn't do that. So he says this emphatically in capital letters. It doesn't do that. So he's saying a flat screen projecting an image from a finite lens onto a flat screen at infinite dimensions doesn't distort. Yeah, it does. Oh, God. And there's very good reason for 2y. And there's a very good reason or two why. Because the problem doesn't exist to begin with. So he just repeated what he already said. Oh, that's so fucking interesting. There simply isn't anything to see beyond the very limited angle range we are all familiar with. What the fuck are you talking about? We're talking about what the math predicts. Did you even read what I wrote? No, of course not. If there was, someone would have seen it by now. So again, this isn't about seeing it. It's about understanding it as a fact. The fact that we don't perceive the subtle fact that the nodes are getting bigger and bigger as you go further and further out. The fact that we don't perceive it because we're only dealing with a very small, limited part of the pie, so we don't see the curve on the edge of the pie plate, doesn't change the fact that the pie plate is curving. Oh, god damn. If there was, someone would have pointed it out by now and shown it to us. I don't accept your assumption. Well, fine. You don't accept it, but you provide no refuting evidence. You just say, I don't accept it, and I emphatically say you're wrong. Oh, well, gee, that's just so fucking interesting. That no one has tried with photographic film. So again, this is another slight against your physics that you're defending. They're the ones who haven't done any experiments. And yet you're ragging on me for the experiments I haven't done. They've had hundreds of years, billions of trillions of dollars, hundreds of millions by now of scientists, and yet they haven't done these basic experiments. This is a critical experiment, and they've never taken film and put it on the two sides, right? So they've never even attempted to collect these peripheral photons. We have no evidence that anyone's ever done the experiment where they just put the photographic film on this side, the photographic film on that side of the experiment, and see how many peripheral photons they collect over a week. Never even tried it, as far as known. Simple, basic. I mean, it's the ABCs of understanding the experiment. They've never done it. And you're ragging on me. I mean, what a despicable piece of shit you are. Just think how desperate scientists are to impress us with things we've never seen before. This would be easy project. Yeah, it'd be easy for them to redo the Eddington experiment from space with a flip cam. Okay, with a $10 camera. All right, you could redo the Eddington experiment with higher quality than Eddington did it in. So you can do the experiment with superior technology, okay, for $10 now, and you don't have to wait for an eclipse. And they didn't redo it on the space shuttle. Why not? All right, it's probably been done and been very disappointing, so no one has ever heard of it. So this is just more nonsense. So there's enough all to see beyond 10 or 20 degrees. This isn't about what you see. It's about what you understand. The argument is that the math is predicting on an arc. That is either true or it's not true. This I don't care argument of yours is retarded. Either you're arguing that's not what math does, that the math is actually changing the L number, and I didn't know that the number's being changed, that somehow magically the math did change the L number. It wasn't, I can just change how far apart the slits are. I can just say the slits are now 20 millimeters apart. I just make up a new number anytime I want, and that's somehow coherent. Oh, of course it's not coherent. You're just such an idiot. 2. If there was, then the curved screen would have shown it, and it hasn't. So he says this in caps again. Where's your evidence? What are you talking about? How does the curved screen fail to keep the nodes the same size? I've tried a few times in various ways, and I promise you it makes no perceptible difference. So apparently he's done the 2-slit experiment from, say, 3 meters or 2 meters. You have to be at least 2 meters, let's say, to get any kind of realistic view of the pattern. And he made a curved screen that was like 3 or 4 meters long, right? I mean, we're talking about pi, right? So we're talking about the radius times pi. It's going to give you your length of your circumference. Radius. Yeah, it's the radius times pi would give you the 180 degrees. There is nothing extra to see. Okay, well, I'm not going to trust you, obviously. I mean, you haven't done any experiments the right way. Okay, careful, disciplined, reasonable. And the only details you show us are the details like, just redundantly do it over and over again, the same part. Like, it didn't show us how much you're compressing the spring, but you'll show us every time you did the experiment the same exact way over and over again, which is, useless. Because you're just about the antics. You're about doing some sort of performance. You're not about the truth and the facts. Okay, you're about whatever this is. This your little 12-year-old silly game you're playing. The main problem with this is the narrow range we are interested in might as well be flat for all the difference it makes. So again, he's arguing that somehow I am wrong in the statement because you can't see the difference in some of the patterns you might do. Now, I'll argue you'll see lots of difference the closer you get. So his argument is because the arc is really large and we're only viewing a small portion of it, that this line just doesn't look different enough from this line. And that's true. I'm not arguing that the difference isn't going to be very perceivable in most of the optical experiments we do. The point is what's the correct answer? Does the math predict here on a flat screen, or is the math predicting here on a curved screen? That's the argument, retard. Which one is true? I'd say it's impossible for the math to be predicting here on a flat screen because there's nothing in the math to account for the huge distortion that's going to be created. There's nothing in the math to compensate for the distortion. So clearly it would be getting completely erroneous answers. So clearly the math is predicting on the curved screen. I mean, and he's provided no evidence to believe otherwise. Oh, he's just such an idiot. All right. In fact, I could even curve it the opposite way and not miss anything. So again, the simple truth is that's because your instrumentation isn't, doing fine enough measurements, because obviously there is a difference. It's just very small. Okay, because the region is good as flat. Unless you happen to be Mr. Spock of Star Trek, you won't see it. All right, so again, this is such a simple argument because people knows when the movies went to wider screens, they had to do things to compensate for the fact that they were actually stretching, the perception, because the projector is shooting it out on a flat screen. The light has to travel longer distances to get to the further locations. These things start having real effects. All right, they become real effects. You could almost argue that on the infinite plane idea that the light would take 3 years to go this way, and only a week. Only milliseconds to go this way. And that it could actually take a very long time for the light to actually hit the screen. You wouldn't even see the guy on the screen for like a year later, because it would take the light so long to bounce back to you from the projector because the huge path length difference. Insane path length difference. So it's academic. So again, this is clearly not academic. It's a clear statement. You say you disagree with it. I say there's no possible way to rationally disagree. The math is predicting the curved screen. Okay, on a curved line. That's the prediction. That's where the math says the node of that certain size will be. It'll be a certain brightness and a certain size at the location on that curved radius. It's meaningless to anyone who wants to study the pattern. So this is how, this is a perfect example of why his science sucks. Because he really doesn't care about the facts and the truth that you have to build your theory in. Okay, your theory has to be built into the parts that are true. You can't jump out of the true box, okay, and then pretend you're doing good science and figure out how it works. There is nothing extra to see. So again, this is a totally irrational explanation for how the math isn't predicting on a curved line. Because it doesn't make any difference. Well, obviously it makes a huge difference. If you know different, then show us. I don't have to show anything. You didn't show anything. You have to show me. Okay? I don't have to defend the fact that L is a radius. Okay? That's just a fact. If you can explain to me how it's not a radius and that L changes in the math and that the distance between the slits changes, you must show me. Okay? Otherwise, I think I'm on the reasonable intuition side. Okay, the problem with your channel is you show us anything. Well, that bullshit. I just showed you a drawing, okay, that pretty much illustrates, that models it quite adequately. Completely good enough. Doesn't seem like physics channel as much as you private fantasy channel. So again, the arguments are the arguments that were stated as bullet points. You'll either disagree with them with some kind of evidence or you'll disagree with them with your pontification. So you've pontificated that the math isn't predicting on a curved screen, yet you provided zero evidence. You've pontificated that if I tie a string to the 2 point sources and move it on that arc, somehow I'll get different size nodes. But you provided absolutely zero evidence of why I should believe that's true. You're an asshole. Alright, anyway, this is just too stupid. I'm not asking you to do anything unusual or anything I wouldn't do myself. I don't care. With what's important to you and what's important to me are two different things, quite obviously. I want some reasoning that makes something called sense. You aren't willing to provide any. Just jump over that pile of shit. You've changed your tune pretty fast. I didn't change any tune. More bullshit. Let's see. Not long ago, no measurement method was good enough. No. So he's arguing that I think the string is able to perfectly model this and that we all should use strings. I pointed out in the argument that it's just a model and that obviously I can't even make a string that's 10 meters long and then do these angles. I mean, it's just not very practical to do a string experiment that has anything to do with the actual wavelength of light. Obviously I have to make the base, I can't even put two pins that are 500 nanometers apart, obviously. So I'd have to do it on a much bigger scale. Oh, you're just such an asshole. The thing goes on about, the spirographs were great, and blah, 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 blah. The point for you to argue is explain how when you used a spirograph, you got lots of lopsided images. Lots of things that weren't symmetrical. Look, I do get that broken photons, etc. is a thinking outside. It's not a thinking outside the box. I mean, what box was I supposed to be in? I mean, it's so fucking stupid. The very fact that you think in their box in the first place doesn't make any sense. Why did you think it makes perfectly good sense to describe photons as two snakes, a double helix flying through space? Why did that ever make sense to you in the first place? I wasn't outside any box. I wasn't a fucking idiotic retard. It's like saying thinking outside the Jesus box. Why would I ever think in the Jesus box? It was always a silly story. Anyway, we need to think outside. So he says it twice again. But at the same time, we have to be critical of our own ideas. Well, you've just written a whole bunch of tripe where you haven't come close to doing anything what critical thinking requires, which is produce something called evidence, shithead, or shut the fuck up. Probably more so. To offset the confirmation bias. So again, you have a confirmation bias based on having seen no evidence. You believe 10-ton trains going 5 miles an hour have less energy than 5-ton trains going 10 miles an hour. Yet you don't have a single shred of fucking evidence to demonstrate that's possibly true. You've been told that it takes 4 times more gas to go 60 miles an hour than it does to go 30 miles an hour. Have you ever seen it actually taking 4 times more gas? No. Especially if we are essentially working alone on ideas. Well, whatever. TBC. I don't know what the fuck that means, but fuck it. Alright, I made a video a year ago testing how much improvement could be gained by using a curved screen. Huh. I don't remember that. I could see the difference for the reasons stated in my last comment. So he couldn't see the difference. But again, he's talking about a tiny percentage at the very the center. Obviously the distortion is the least in the center and it's the most at 90 degrees. So obviously if you're only looking at this little bit, you're not going to see much of the distortion. But clearly at 45 degrees or something, it's going to be huge. Alright, I could see the difference. Alright, I couldn't see. I see Libra offered to do this experiment too. I don't care who the fuck that is. Maybe this will save him the bother unless he can do it to such an implicitly high standard, laboratory standard, at the eagle wearing spectacles might say. Well, whatever. I mean, obviously, the closer you are, the more photons you can analyze and all that stuff, but the smaller the pattern gets. So yes, it gets a little... It's difficult to decide. Even your viewing screen, like a piece of paper, has a whole bunch of texture in it, which makes, can ruin the results. What I'm looking for again, question mark. I don't even know what it is that you're arguing. It's just too fucking stupid. The fact that the math is predicting on a curved screen is undisputable. So what's your argument? Okay. If eagles ever learn to talk. Okay, so this is just baby talk, mush bullshit. Okay, irrelevant. Alright, so yeah, so he points out that he does another comment to this other asshole. Yeah. So I'll read some of that. It's hardly worth calling it an experiment, really. Oops, caps on. It's just basic geometry to recognize that the angles have to be increasingly large as the rulers or string with notches on it are swept around the arc. Yeah, but the two lengths of string are, one's getting shorter and one's getting longer. So the sides of the triangle are always the same amount. The string doesn't get any longer, dumbass. Okay, forming triangles with a constant base. Yeah, and technically a constant sides, because whatever one side gets, the other side lost. So it's the same triangle, fundamentally. Well, anyway, would be the correct term. If the slits are implement with the strings are attached to, then the other two sides have to change lengths to find the various places where the notches line up. Well, of course they're changing length, retard. You're getting further from one and closer to the other. I mean, as you go around the arc, you're getting closer to the one source and you're getting further from the other source. Duh. Okay, and he laughed his silly head off at Professor Walter Flunt for making a brilliant, so he's still saying it's a brilliant interactive thing. So why even make these responses, right? Because this guy just doesn't accept anything as a fact. There's no double slit pattern in his pattern, idiot. He doesn't even put the width of the slits in the math. It's the single impediment simulation. It's not a double slit simulation. It's a single impediment simulation in the first place. I mean, and obviously it's getting wrong answers at the fringes because it's not even the right math. It's not four-source math. So how could it, you know, you're defending it as brilliant when it's not even the right pattern. It's the simulation is doing this. This is all they put in the math that runs the simulation. Okay, the simulation is called the double slit experiment, and the only thing in the math is this dimension, this D, this L, okay, on a curve, and the wavelength of the light. How is that the double slit experiment? You explain it to me, Steve. Explain to me how that's a brilliant way to draw and simulate the double slit experiment, is to put one distance in, the distance to the target in, and the wavelength of the light. And that's all you need. What the hell? That's the double slit experiment right there. I just did the double slit experiment, right? I completely describe every feature of the double slit experiment is completely in that one little this. That's the double slit experiment. Don't you see the double slits? Can't we all see the fucking double slits? So he did a simulation for the single impediment. He called it the double slit experiment for no good reason whatsoever. I mean, it's absolutely quite obvious it doesn't have the slits in it. Quite obviously it's missing a dimension, isn't it? Yes, D2. Obviously it's not creating the double slit pattern. I mean, there's really no excuse for me to have to say that again. There's no excuse for me to have to redo that argument, okay? That it's not even the right fucking pattern. I mean, I shouldn't have to say that more than once. So yeah, I'm done reading because this, I mean, that's just too stupid that he's going back and fucking goddamn trying to say there was something accurate to physics. That this was a good simulator. Somebody who wants to understand the double slit experiment should, you know, understand the single sponge experiment. If you want to understand the double slit experiment, fuck the double slit experiment. Understand the single sponge experiment, because that's telling you the fucking truth. That's the double slit experiment right there. That's all we need. We don't need anything else. Double slit right there. I mean, fuck you. Too pathetic. Alright, that's enough of a video. So these details are important. If somebody has, see, I was trying to find the reasoning. Like, why would you believe, okay, that the nodes get bigger or smaller? Okay, mathematically or geometrically. Why would you think, okay, that somehow the place where there's going to be constructive and destructive, right? That somehow, why would they be any kind of different size? And especially if I just, like I said, did the simple thing. I have a string here and I have a string here, and I let it roll on that line. Why would the amount of string moving from this side going on to that side, or vice versa, you know, I mean the amount of string going from this side rolling onto this side, why would I think as I'm rolling it more string or less string is moving from one side to the other? Isn't every tiny millimeter that I go on this distance, isn't exactly the same amount of string going to roll over and roll over and roll over and roll over? Exactly the same amount of string will roll over. Is there some logical reason to believe that isn't true? If somebody has it, I'd be interested. So until somebody gives me a reason to believe that doesn't happen, yeah, I don't have to do this. I mean, again, it really is a simple thing to do, but I refuse to do it until there's a reason to do it. And there's no reason to. There's no logic here. All right. This is so dismal, you know, that people really are this belligerently hostile to being, you know, to accepting the truth. I think people accepted evolution easier than this is happening almost. I mean, the people who still don't believe in evolution really are the die-hard loony fanatics, right? I mean, come on. But who knows? I mean, it is just, that's probably a good comparison, actually, just because people were so... But, it's hard to put all that evidence together. People aren't going to read Darwin, right? They're not going to read all of the little instances when you line them all up, all the examples that just make it so obvious, connecting the geology, the movement of islands, the time, all of it connected, Anyway. But yeah, I really didn't think people were this dumb. I mean, I'm such an anti-human person in terms of thinking so little of human beings. But I really didn't think they were this fucking hostile to, oh yeah, that's a good argument. I really didn't think so. I mean, especially from people who will be watching my videos who aren't going to be exactly a bunch of religious kooks. These are people that's supposed to have some kind of give a shit about science and truth, and just this belligerent hostility. Alright, anyway, that's the way it is, so I'll just have to endeavor to persevere. I'll keep doing the right thing and you can keep doing the wrong thing. I guess that's the way it's going to work for a while, and that sucks. It's sad, More work for me, more aggravation for you, but that's all we got. So, hey, that didn't work. It worked that time. Alright, so till the next time, this has been a DraftScience video presentation.